Hi, I'm Jen Hall, co-author of the Entrepreneurial Mindset Profile, or EMP. Thanks for taking the EMP, and we hope that you will find this feedback report useful in considering, leveraging, and developing your unique strengths in entrepreneurial mindset. Just a few reminders before we help you explore your results. First, the philosophy behind the EMP is that some aspects of the entrepreneurial mindset reflect relatively stable characteristics and behaviors, the personality scales, while others are cognitive and problem-solving skills, which can be more easily learned and developed, the skills scales. Your feedback report presents scores on both sets of scales, personality and skills, which are compared to an entrepreneur norm group as well as a corporate manager norm group. Secondly, there are no good or bad scores on the EMP. Your results will not tell you whether you are or are not entrepreneurial, or whether you should or should not become an entrepreneur. Rather, they will help you identify ways in which you are most and least like entrepreneurs in general and corporate managers in general. And how you interpret your results, the degree to which you believe your scores are serving you well or presenting stumbling blocks, or both, depends on your individual context as well as on your own personal and professional goals. Third, a strengths-based approach can help you target areas for development. Research suggests that you can enhance your performance more easily by focusing on your strengths rather than by solely concentrating on your weaknesses. As you go through your report, be sure to note scales on which you score particularly high compared to the entrepreneur norm group and even to the corporate manager norm group, and consider utilizing these strengths very intentionally in pursuit of your professional goals. With that in mind, I would invite you to consider and identify either a current challenge or an important goal. If you're a corporate manager, for example, it might have to do with driving growth in your organization. If you're a student, maybe it's about excelling in school or determining your future path. If you're an aspiring entrepreneur, it could be a goal related to your first venture. Please take a minute now to pause the video to give yourself time to identify and jot down that current challenge or goal. This will allow you to interpret your EMP results in light of something that is especially relevant for you right now. When you're ready, please click Continue. Now we're ready to take a look at your results. First, I'll walk you through an overview of the entire report and then help you look at your results in greater detail. I'm going to suggest that if you haven't done so already, you take a moment now to print out the report so you can move easily between it and this video. If you flip over the cover page, you will see page 1 of the report, which lists all of the personality scales and their definitions. Independence, preference for limited structure, nonconformity, risk acceptance, action orientation, passion, and need to achieve. The next page, page 2, shows a graph of the personality scales, with a green line indicating the average scores for entrepreneurs, the blue line for corporate managers, and the red line for you. The left side of the graph is a numerical rating, with 1 being less true for you, and 5 being more true for you. Each scale score is the average of your responses to the 5 or 6 items that make up that scale. Take a moment to see where you fall in general in relationship to the entrepreneur and corporate manager norm groups. Make note of any particularly high or low scores. Pages 3, 4, and 5 of the feedback report show every item for each of the personality scales. In other words, you get to see how you answered on every single question on the instrument compared to the entrepreneurial group and the corporate manager group. The first line under each scale is the overall scale score, and then the lines beneath that are the individual items or questions for each scale. Notice that some items and scores are in italics. That is because those particular items are worded in a way that suggests the opposite of what the scale is measuring. These items are reverse scored, so if you answered a 1, it will get transformed into a 5. For example, one of the items in the independent scale is, I like to consult with others on important decisions. In order to get credit toward a high independence score, you would have to disagree with this item. So a rating of 1, does not describe me well, would be converted to a 5, does describe me well, before being averaged with the other items on that scale. If you rated this item a 5, it would be converted to a 1 before being averaged with the other scale items. In this report, the item scores you see represent your actual responses, that is, the ratings you gave before they were converted. Take some time to look at these pages in more detail. Take special note of any norm group scores followed by an asterisk. The asterisk indicates a significant difference from your score on this scale. Also, look for patterns within your scores. Are you generally lower or higher than one or both of the norm groups? Are there certain scales on which you score particularly high or low? Are there seeming contradictions in your responses? If there are, that could mean that you read a question wrong, but more likely it's just a function of the fact that as humans, we're not particularly motivated to be internally consistent. Which scales are most important in your particular job? Page 6 of the feedback report lists all of the skill scales and their definitions. Future focus, idea generation, execution, self-confidence, optimism, persistence, and interpersonal sensitivity. Page 7 is a graph of the skills scales. This graph is very similar to the previous graph of personality scales on page 2, where you can see your scores compared to the entrepreneur group and the corporate manager group. Take a moment to see how you compare in general to these two norm groups and make note of any particularly high or low scores. Pages 8, 9, and 10 show every item for each of the skill scales. Again, look at these pages in more detail. Pay special attention to where your scores are significantly different from the norm groups. Okay, now I'm going to show you how you can focus in on your feedback results and get started on a development plan. Go back to page 2 of the personality scales and page 7 of the skill scales. Take a closer look at these two graphs and identify the two scales on which you are least entrepreneurial. That is, the two scales on which your scores are lower than the corporate norm by the widest margin, or if all your scores are above the corporate norm, those which are closest to the norm. Since interpersonal sensitivity is different from the other 13 scales in that the entrepreneur norm is lower than the corporate norm, please pick among the remaining 13 scales for the purposes of this exercise. For example, a student interested in developing execution skills could talk to a professor about starting a special interest entrepreneurship club. A corporate leader interested in being more future-focused could engage with an executive coach with expertise in strategic leadership. And an aspiring entrepreneur low in self-confidence might consider joining Toastmasters or a business networking group. Now that we've looked at your lower scores in some detail, let's take a look at those same graphs to identify your key strengths in entrepreneurial mindset. Identify the two scales across both personality and skill scales, excluding interpersonal sensitivity, on which you are most entrepreneurial. That is, the two scales on which your scores are higher than the entrepreneur norm by the widest margin. Or, if all your scores are below the entrepreneur norm, those which are closest to it. It is our hope that you will spend some time thinking very intentionally about how, without overusing them, you can leverage these strengths in service of the key challenge or goal you identified earlier. For example, maybe you are strong in action orientation, but have been feeling uncharacteristically paralyzed in your pursuit of funding for your new venture. By seeing your own very high score on this scale, you may be able to call to mind how decisive and proactive you are in other arenas, and challenge yourself to leverage that approach in this particular situation, and in doing so, overcome this specific hurdle. Now that you've reviewed your report and identified some of your key strengths and development needs, please take a look at the EMP Development Guide by clicking on the link on page 10. This guide will help you further interpret your results, offer tips on each scale, and provide resources for successful action planning and further development. Although you probably will focus on your highest and lowest scales, we encourage you to read the descriptions and development suggestions for all of the scales to get an overall view. Many of the scales are closely linked, and reading the development guide in its entirety could help you increase your effectiveness in a variety of areas related to entrepreneurial mindset. Pay close attention to the section on successful action planning. Creating specific, measurable goals is an important part of leveraging your existing strengths and enhancing skill sets that would benefit you. Don't forget to interpret your results in light of the current goal or challenge that you identified earlier. Keep the future in mind by devoting a specific amount of time every week to your development, and enlist the support of family, friends, or outside sources. If there's anything we can do to help, please let us know. Thanks again for taking the Entrepreneurial Mindset Profile, and we wish you all the best.